In this video, I'm going to show you how to disassemble this Sony A7 III. Plus, I'm also going to show you how to keep track of each and every one of those little screws so that you know exactly where they go back to. Before you get started though, be sure to download these screw layout guides that I made for you. Just put a piece of double-sided tape over the top of each of these yellow screw heads. Then when you take a screw out, just stand it on its head on top of that tape. It'll keep it pretty secure for you. I'll put the download links for these diagrams in the description of this video. The first thing to do is to make sure that the battery and the SD cards are removed. Next, you can remove the eye cup. To start with, we're going to need to remove this grip. That's because there's a couple of screws hidden underneath. Just take something thin and flat and slide it underneath, and you'll start to pick it up, and then you can just lift the whole thing up. You want to be careful how far you insert something underneath there though, because we have the near field communication antenna right underneath there. You know it's here because of the emblem. So just lift up on the edge and then start pulling it. It should come off pretty easy. When we reassemble the camera, I'll show you what I use to reattach this grip to the camera. The first screw that we're going to remove is right behind the main LCD display, right there. Okay, next we're going to take out 5 screws across here and 1 inside the battery compartment. And I put the screws on the diagram on the sticky tape. Okay, I think you got the gist of my high-tech system now. Now we're going to take out 4 screws from the audio-video end of the camera. Now we'll go to the SD card end of the camera. There's 2 screws inside underneath the cover that we need to remove. And now there's a screw on each side of where the power button is. Now we've got 4 screws around the viewfinder and 1 for the focus knob to remove. So now we can remove the entire back panel. To start, open these 2 doors on the end of the audio-video end, and then just take your finger and work it into the edge and pull up lightly. It won't take too much. Now be careful when you lift up on it, because well, there's 2 things going on. These doors are going to fall off. That's no big deal. But there is a flat ribbon cable inside that connects the back panel to the motherboard. The connector for this flat ribbon cable is called a ZIF, or Zero Insertion Force socket. That's because it has this bar on here. All we have to do is pick up on this bar, and that will release that cable. just like that. Now we can just lift this piece of plastic up that goes over the viewfinder. Now we can remove the entire viewfinder. Before we do though, we're going to need to release this ZIF socket so that we can take this flat ribbon cable out. And there's also another flat ribbon cable right here. Now this socket is not a ZIF. This one is just simply a compression or a friction. It just holds it in there when it's pushed in. There's nothing locking it in there. So we'll lift this locking bar and then we'll pull this one out. So you can see on this flat ribbon cable there's a couple of little ears that stick out. I use tweezers and I just put it down underneath and then just push. It doesn't take much. To remove the viewfinder, we just have to pick up on it now. Pretty cool. So if your goal was to remove the back cover to work on it, maybe on the LCD display or one of the buttons, or to work on the viewfinder, that's all you have to do. But if it's something else that you're going to work on, then there's going to be a lot more to take off. The next part that comes off, you can just lift it right off of there, is this piece of plastic that goes over the audio-video sockets. And now we'll finish taking the bottom plate off. There's 4 screws left in that. So now that should just lift right off of there. And you can also take this piece of metal out that has the threaded hole for the tripod. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the entire top piece. So everything that we're working on here as far as screws will be on the second diagram. Before we do anything though, let's go ahead and disconnect these flat ribbon cables. They're both ZIF connectors. We'll start by removing the 2 screws that are inside the viewfinder compartment. Now we're going to remove the silver screw that's on the right, that's way down inside. And now on the other end of the camera, just as far down inside as the other one, there's another silver screw right there. Now we can just lift that entire top piece off of there. At this point, there's 2 parts that we could remove. We could either remove the main board here, or if your goal is just to get to the headphone jack to replace it, you could remove just that. You don't have to take the main board off to remove that, and vice versa. If you're going to work on something further down past the main board, you will have to take both of them off. So we'll go ahead and remove the headphone jack first, and then we'll take the main board off. First thing we have to do is just take off that piece of plastic, and you'll see 2 flat ribbon cables. One of them goes to the headphone jack, and there's 2 screws holding that down. We'll go ahead and remove the main board now. Before we do though, we have to disconnect 10 flat ribbon cables. And in addition to that, we also have this that runs along on top of the main board. I believe it's an anti-static material and possibly a thermal conductor. This is just glued down, so we just have to gently lift up on it. In addition to that, there's some tape right here. And now we'll start disconnecting the flat ribbon cables. Down underneath there are 2 more flat ribbon cables. Now this one also has a piece of plastic over the top. Just take it off. Now over here we have 3. 2 of these are ZIF and 1 is a compression. This one is also a compression or friction. There's 2 flat ribbon cables up on the top. Now these might be easier to remove if we remove the screws from the main board first and allow the board to actually lift up a little bit. There is a Wi-Fi connector right here though for this wire. So we just lift up on it and it'll come right off. We'll go ahead and remove 5 screws from the main board now. 1 right here, right there, 2 right here, and 1 down here. Alright, with the motherboard loose now, we can see that there's another flat ribbon cable down on this end. So we'll go ahead and disconnect it first. We'll lift it up, pull it out, and then we can get the 2 on top. The other end of this anti-static material is just glued down over here, so we can just pick up on it. The next part that we can remove is this entire metal plate here. There's only 4 screws holding it down. One right there, one down here inside, one down inside here, and one up on top right here. Now on this screw right here, something you're going to have to watch for is a magnet that's part of the CCD unit. It actually will attract that screw once you pull that screw out of the hole. So you got to be real careful, otherwise it'll get caught over there. Now we can just lift this plate right off of there. And you can see we have one circuit board on the back that contains this little gem, which is the battery for the date and time. What we're looking at now is the back side of the CCD unit. You'll notice that it jiggles. That's because the CCD is mounted in such a way that it's controlled by a magnetic field. That's called the in-body image stabilization. To remove the CCD, we'll end up lifting up more of this anti-static material here, and then there's 3 screws that hold it down. Now this one is already loose. This one is still stuck. And we've also got one up on top. The 3 screws that hold it down are located here, up on top, and then there's one underneath this piece of tape. We'll go ahead and remove the 3 screws, but we won't pick up the CCD unit yet. What we have to watch for when we pick the CCD unit up is for these little shims that are used at each location of the screws. Now there's one right here, you can actually see it. That's the these are guide pins right now that you can see, and this shim goes all the way up to where the screw was. There's a shim up here, you can see it, and there's also a shim underneath this one. Now the thing that's important is that when we lift it up, we need to make sure, and so that we know exactly where each shim came from, because each shim can be a different thickness. It'll have a number written on it indicating the thickness that it is, and that's so that they do it that way so that they can get the CCD unit to lay completely flat in regards to the lens unit. So we have to make sure we get them in the right spot on the diagram sheet, because I put spots on here so that we can put up to 3 shims. I've only seen 2 shims at the most. This particular camera, there's 1 shim here, 1 here, but this spot has 2 shims. So I thought, well, I added a 3rd just in case. So you'll write the number down that you see on the shim and then put the shim on that spot. So let's go ahead and pick that CCD unit up. And you can see all the shims stayed down here. None of them are up here on the CCD unit, which is good. So we'll go ahead and take the first shim off, which is right here. And we can see that is a 4.5, which means it's a 0.45 millimeter. So we'll put that shim on this layout guide, and we'll write the number 45, just so that we know for sure. And this one is a 50. So I'll go ahead and show you on this last one that this one actually has two shims. So we'll go ahead and take the top shim off, which is the thickest one. And we can see that is a 55, which is 0.55 millimeters. The last one is very thin. And I don't see any numbers on it. If we check it, we can see it's 0.04 millimeters. Now you're going to want to use diagram 3 to keep track of the screws for the next part. Okay, at this point we have a choice on which part we can take out. We can either take out the microphone jack right here, or we can take out the entire shutter assembly. We can take either out by themselves. We don't have to remove one to get the other out. We'll go ahead and take out the microphone jack first. There's 3 screws that we're going to have to remove. One right there, there, and then this one right here. So that last screw also holds down this piece of plastic. And that actually was holding down the edge of part of the microphone jack. So that's why that had to come out first. To remove the jack, you need to open the cover up. And what we're going to do is lift up on this piece of plastic that runs down here. That's actually part of the face plate. So just pick up on this edge and then work it to where you get the other edge to come up, and the whole face plate and the jack will come out. Now to remove the jack from here, there's just a couple of small clips that you lift up on and it'll pop right out of there. We'll go ahead and remove the entire shutter assembly now. There's 3 screws remaining. There's one right here by this motor, one right here, and one here. There was a 4th screw, but we already took it out. That was the one holding down that black piece of plastic. The shutter assembly will lift right out of there now. The last part that we can remove is this inner plate here. There's only 4 screws holding it down. 2 on the bottom, one right here, and one right there. Now you can just lift it right out of there. Okay, that pretty much covers it on this disassembly, at least down to this point. There are a few things left on the battery box, such as the near field communication antenna and some other items that I'll cover in a later video. All of our screws for this disassembly are now on 3 layout guides, and they're all nice and secure.